Hey, party people, it's Jaime. Producing our podcast, Confessions of a Creative Director, is one of the most rewarding and fulfilling projects of my life. I can't believe I get to meet and talk to some of the most successful and influential creative directors from around the world. I'm thrilled by all the support and encouragement I receive from listeners everywhere. Now, as a fan of the show, I invite you to join my Patreon and become a supporter of the show. You'll help me cover the editing, hosting services, and maybe the occasional tequila soda for yours truly. If you've derived real-world value from my conversations with the world's best creatives, this is your way to help keep it going. Visit my Patreon and sign up to become a supporter today. You'll get access to additional content from the show and maybe even a few surprises. I'm looking forward to many more episodes, and I hope you'll come along for the ride with me. Visit patreon.com/confessions of a creative director to become a supporter today. That's patreon.com/confessions of a creative director. Thanks. This episode is brought to you by What's the Big Idea? An indispensable guide to becoming a kick-ass creative director by yours truly, Jaime Cabrera. Pick it up on Amazon and now available on Audible. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, Confessions of a Creative Director, the original podcast made by a creative director for creative directors, for aspiring creative directors, for creatives of all types looking to up their game by learning from the world's best. This is your podcast, and I am your host, Jaime Cabrera. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to have an in-depth chat with Mark DePace, Chief Creative Officer, and Zach Mortensen, the CEO of Ghost Robot. This innovative studio is a one-stop creative powerhouse for top-tier clients like Netflix, Google, Peloton, Away, and Airbnb, just to name a few. Ghost Robot stands out as a channel-agnostic creative hub, adept at tackling complex marketing challenges with a diverse array of solutions, from video games and apps to comic books, card games, and even podcasts. These are the guys that you call when you're like, who the heck can get this done? Today, we're getting an insider's look at how Mark and Zach balance their roles, perfectly meshing the creative and business sides of their company. They're here to share their insights on building a successful, collaborative environment in the fast-paced world of running a creative business. So, without further ado, let's get into it with Mark DePace and Zach Mortensen. Welcome to Confessions of a Creative Director. How are you guys?
Good. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys for making the time. I appreciate that you guys wore the appropriate outfit so that I can. It's a lot easier for me to tell who is the business side of the house and who is the creative side of the house. You guys are wearing the appropriate uniform. I'm just kidding, but it is
on
interesting
brand,
to see.
on
Yeah,
brand,
it's on brand, right? Like I can quickly tell.
Yeah. Well, we both wear a lot of different hats. Clearly, I wear more than Zach does, but yeah, we both have both sides of those brains, the production side and the creative side. So we avoided titles for many years for that reason until some folks that we trust recently said, "Hey, you guys gotta give yourselves real titles."
Nah. Well, that's cool, but I'm excited to jump into all of that, because that's definitely the topic that we're gonna cover. Is that sort of the yin and yang, and how do the both sides of the brain can work together, right? The business account side and the creative side. But first, I got to tell you, I'm awarding you. This is the official Confessions of a Creative Director award for best creative shop name, Ghost Robot. It's so evocative. It says so much. I'd love for you to tell me later how you guys came up with that. But the way that you describe Ghost Robot is you are a creative studio of the future. We work with a global community of artistic talent to create content for forward-thinking clients. So kind of unpack that for us, if you would, and just kind of tell us what that means. Because, in looking at your website, I love it because you have all kinds of different clients, and B, you're just doing so many different types of work, so much different output, right? So you're sort of an channel agnostic, creative studio, right? That says, all right, well, what's the business challenge, and let's figure out how to solve it. It could be content, it could be, some other form of marketing or advertising. So just kind of unpack how you guys see yourselves.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that, describing what you do is the hardest brief you can give any business owner or creative. And we sort of landed on this creative studio of the future after recognizing that, for almost, 20 years, we've consistently been, a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of where the industry is going. And, just our mentality when we, tackle projects is, we always say, how can we do this a little bit differently? We don't want to do the same thing twice. What's something innovative? And that just constantly keeps things different. So we get bored very, very easily. So, that's our, and like you said, like how to, maybe this is a video, maybe this is a podcast, maybe this is a graphic novel, maybe this is a card game, a pop-up experience. There's a lot of different ways to tell stories, and we want to use our experience and our infrastructure to do it all.
Zach, how did you and Mark meet, or how did you guys come together and eventually sort of create this agency in the future? Give us a little background on that.
Yeah, Mark and I both came out of the independent film world. So we're both in the indie film world in New York. I'm a little bit older than Mark, so I was doing it at a little bit different time, but we found ourselves working together on lots of different projects at the time. And, I think indie films are exciting and they're fun, but by their nature, you don't really get a lot of fun tools to play with. You're trying to crank out 8 pages a day. It's like setup, and, sitting on set, going to, location scouting, sitting at lunch, being, talking with Mark. We're like, man, it would be, all of these same tools, all the same skill set. We'd really like to be exploring things visually differently. And I think that sort of, to us, and during those conversations kind of pointed towards short form work. And so we looked at it, and Mark had been doing a lot of work in music videos at the time, while I was doing a lot of work in feature films at the time. And so we said, we said, let's pull it together and focus on how we can go after more of that short form work, and hopefully use that as a launching board to really explore visually creative projects. So in the earliest days, that was millions of music videos, always with an eye towards advertising and marketing. So it's kind of a natural evolution there, but the sort of seed was how do we harness more exciting, tools for storytelling, and that's what sort of led us together.
That's awesome. And if you could just expand a little on the name, because when I saw the name in my mind, and I wonder if this was early on, it was almost like this indication that you could sort of be behind the scenes, right? And a robot in the sense that you could do anything, right? And you're sort of super powerful, and you could do anything. Is that sort of where the name came from?
It's definitely got a bit of the the soul of the machine, or the ghost in the mechanics, but and we've always been very conscious not to call it films or entertainment or something like that. We didn't want to limit ourselves right from the get-go. So it was really about creating this brand for storytelling that could be the Swiss Army knife. But we were producing a music video for the band 07 at the time, and it was about a little lonely gardener robot who is traveling through infinite space and slowly comes to realize that all the humans on the spaceship are gone, and the robot is constantly cooking meals and throwing them away, and has sort of an epiphany and turns himself off. So at the time, we were making this video about a robot, and it was a very existential robot, and so the name kind of came together and worked out really well to apply to that, and we thought it was cool. And I'm just a huge sci-fi fan.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
it's
wanted something that reflected my interests as well.
It's very
yeah,
evocative.
that's where it came from.
I love it. I know we'll have to track down that video and then post a link to it.
Yeah, and the video itself was the first music video ever to use the machinima. So we were working with video game engines to generate the animation. So, and working closely with the software company for the Quake 3 Arena game engine to generate all the story assets and then bring them into a more traditional edit. So, won a number of awards early on, and it was kind of the first kind of commercial application of machinima back in the day.
Wow, that's very cool. So, again, I love sort of the ethos of the company. I imagine that it's hard to that it's sometimes hard to sell or sometimes hard to communicate, right? Because what I've noticed is a lot of clients want a very definitive idea of what each agency is going to do, right? This is the digital agency, this is the experiential agency, this is the advertising agency. So I'm just curious, how do you communicate that hey, listen, we solve business problems with creativity? Like, how do you communicate that in a way that, because you're working with some pretty amazing brands. So how do you communicate that? Because I imagine that can be a hurdle.
It is. And like I said, it's always a challenge. Just describing what you do is not easy. And I think it's a instinct that most creatives have to try and avoid that as much as possible. I think we're lucky enough at this point that we have a body of work and a breadth of work that is really varied, but also feels very cohesive. And that's been really important for us, especially these past, 5-6 years, is really honing in on the Ghost Robot brand and being able to identify what a Ghost Robot project is. And there is that element of exploration. There's that element of sort of, exuberance or irreverence. It's colorful, it's upbeat, it touches culture in a really specific way. We've been confident that if we just continue tackling projects that, reflect who we are creatively, that somehow that does come through. But you are right. We've always looked at, ambiguity as an opportunity. I think a lot of people are sort of, averse to it or get scared of it. But we want those projects, where people are like, hey, we don't really know what we want to do, and don't know how to do it, but we know we want it to be kind of cool or reach this audience, and that might scare other companies, but for us, that's been the opportunity for us to expand and try new things, and in a lot of cases, do things that we're not really qualified to do. So it's.
And sometimes it's also just a part of the conversation with your partners, and saying, the client, and saying, hey, who's doing this part of it? Is that, how are you guys tackling that? So, if we find that there's a larger scope or a larger scale, being able to say, we can be a resource. I know you came to us for X, but we also can tackle Y and Z.
Yeah.
We actually have in our, capabilities, one of our capabilities is unusual requests. So, we're constantly telegraphing that, being like, hey, if you don't know who to call, we want to be those people. And I think that's afforded us a lot of opportunities to do some really different things.
That's awesome. I love that. I marked a couple of those sections there. Opportunities in the ambiguity. It's just, that's very, that's brilliant. I love that. So, I started off the show by making a joke, right, about how we are perceived in our different roles, right? And I was talking about the uniforms and whatnot. But there is a difference, right? There is a difference in the way that maybe the account side or the business side looks at something, and the way that the creative side looks at something. But there are a lot of things, if you're looking at a Venn diagram, right, there's a lot of things that the two sides share, right? And I used to do a presentation, an internal presentation called, creatives are lazy and account people don't do anything all day, and other misconceptions about our roles, right? Because that's kind of the, in the standard agency, that's always been the sort of the perception, but there's a lot more in common, I think. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because I think you guys have sort of cracked that code. But what is it that you think has allowed you guys to sort of bridge that gap of understanding? What is it about it? Is it process related? Is it just a kind of a common understanding of who you are, or the goals? Or tell us how you sort of managed to bridge that gap.
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's definitely like all about process and procedures. Like Zach said, we both came from that independent film world where, you're generating, tons of documents every single day. Everything needs to stay very organized. It's sort of a, competition, who can make the most beautiful pre-production book. And, both of us just really had this affinity for, that paperwork and organization of information. And, even when it was just the two of us, really making our processes and our procedures, really specific about how we do things. And then as we grow and bring on more staff members, some people can't embrace that or see the value in it. But we always sort of said, like, if you got hit by a bus, somebody's got to, pick up your job tomorrow and know where you were and what you were doing and be able to take it from there. So, just having that, desire to have everything be, I don't want to say regimented or strict, but, easy to follow has always been there. Sort of this idea that systems create freedom. And if, you have a system in place where how you approach a problem or approach a task, then it gives you the opportunity to explore and think and have the flexibility to, actually do the creative work.
And that's the foundation, and that becomes the foundation and the springboard from which the creative work and the storytelling and the marketing derives. If that's a stable foundation, and that's a foundation that we've built together across the creative and the account side, then there's a lot more opportunity to explore, that gives the creatives less more freedom to continue to explore and make it happen, and understanding what that foundation and what those the organization can be.
Yeah. And Mark, what you were saying, right, in some ways is unusual. Not unusual, but I would say it's rare, right, at least in my experience, for the creatives to be that buttoned up. But I feel like I think that you hit the nail on the head, right? It's like you have to commit things to paper. You have to leave, you have to have a plan. Like you said, if you get hit by a bus, how are you going to pick this up, right? So I think that it is probably a little bit rare, because you often, the stereotype, right, of the creatives sort of having their feet up on the desk, just sort of waxing poetic and hoping that somebody else is taking notes, right? It's like, I have a big idea, right? Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to be the type of creative that is prepared, similar to you, that has, their shit together, that has committed stuff to paper, because that kind of stuff drives me nuts, right? Just that stereotypical idea of the godlike creative director that just sort of spouts out genius, and somebody else is expected to follow them around with a notepad,
Yeah. I mean, I've always said, an idea doesn't exist unless you write it down. That's the first step in pretty much any process. And I think what you're really doing is taking that question, what do I do next, out of the equation. And if you can answer that for people, it makes tasks, whether they're creative or logistical, a lot less daunting. It's like, okay, I instead of focusing on this big huge problem, I'm really just focusing on this one little portion of it, and that makes, I can see the finish line, and I'm not just sort of paralyzed by the endless possibilities that are out there, which can be very, very daunting.
Yeah. Zach, how do you think that this kind of ethos, or this kind of attention to detail and sort of planning and being prepared, where do you think that comes from?
I mean, I think first and foremost, Mark and I are both makers, like we make things, that's how the company was built. Was we rolled up our sleeves and dug in and started doing crazy shit with cameras and art departments. And so I think, to follow up on Mark's point, like what's next is always the, like, when the glue dries, what do we do with this? And so I think that you have to apply when there's a huge budget behind it, you have to apply the same kind of thinking and the same sort of approach and understanding the process. But it's really born out of our desire to really make stuff, and in making stuff, you're kind of writing the rule book or the manual as you go, and that's a budget and a pre-production book and a call sheet. It's also storyboards and a creative brief, and you name it. They all kind of come together, but it is the constant making, and that goes from making it from like Mark said, the first idea that gets written down to the first iteration of a art director pulling it together, to the copywriter starting to throw some words down, to, once then you're like, is this stills? Is this motion? Is this a web, exploration? Is this an experiential thing? Or are we going to go get to build out a space and paint it? Awesome. you know, and as we're going, we're building that manual and the how to, the book and the rules, and I think that's all part and parcel. And it's about, if you've made a model, you need that rule book. you need the manual and the instruction set, and we're building those instruction sets as we go.
Yeah. So it's really that kind of like that production, that maker sort of mentality, right? That is kind of shaped the agency as a whole and the way that the agency operates. Sounds like.
Yeah. Whoa, here comes somebody's making something
right now. I love that.
They're coming through the walls.
Need to move if it doesn't stop.
Oh man, I love that. We couldn't have scripted that any better.
Yeah. And Zach said, starting in independent films and being on these really small sets and doing everything from driving a truck to hanging a wall to setting up lights yourself. I think really both empowered both of us to say, hey, if we can do this, we can make anything. And that's sort of always been our attitude, where, hey, if you can figure out how to produce an independent film, you can
pretty much do anything.
Pretty much any other challenge. There's so many different elements involved that you kind of touch everything.
Right. So I understand that both of you, I believe both of you, doing my research, are also teach. Is that accurate? Tell us about that. I'll let you guys decide who goes first. But how did that come about? And was it driven from a place of like wanting to give back, or was it a way to kind of even understand your own way of thinking and your own process, right? And also maybe as a way to educate your team members.
Mm-hmm.
While Mark goes and solves
Mark goes,
hammering.
yeah. It was really, Mark had started, and it is about giving back. We've always, like, foundationally, Ghost Robot, out of both necessity and desire, have always worked with up and coming teams. And a lot of working with up and coming teams and new talent is sort of teaching. So it's a natural extension when the opportunity, we both taught at NYU and Mark has taught a couple other institutions. When those opportunities present themselves, it's like, hey, yes, let's do that. Yes, it is about giving back. It also, what we uncovered and found while doing is it really makes you think about your own processes. As soon as you have to sit down and explain what you do, naturally or instinctually, and say this is how you do it and why you do it, all of a sudden there's a lot of reflection on the process. There's a lot of reflection on what you're thinking about the process and how you're going about things and what's inherent to you creatively and what is the underlying principles that you're sort of like trying to explain. So it was pretty eye-opening, but also encouraging, because it is about giving back. And I also do a lot of mentoring, and I try to answer the emails that come in from people that are like, can I have a cup of coffee? And, can you give me 15 minutes? And I try hard to do one of those a week or a couple of those a month, to people, because mentorship is such a critical part of career development that we got to be there. And if there's one thing that's been devastating from the pandemic and remote work, is that there's so many up and coming people within the industry that don't have as much exposure to more experienced and veteran participants. And that's where, that's the biggest challenge that I've seen is in the last few years is the teams coming up or the teams coming in that are not getting that kind of exposure, because so much learning is also just through osmosis and paying attention.
Right. What about you, Mark? What's been your experience with the teaching, or how did it come to be? And
yeah. I mean, both my parents were teachers, and I think I've always been naturally interested in doing that. I think the main impetus was having a kid and trying to make a little bit of extra money too.
Yeah.
Which, I quickly realized, hey, there's probably more efficient ways to do this, because teaching is actually a lot of work.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Zach said, it's a great opportunity to, explore what it is that you do and, unpack those things that you sort of do subconsciously. Also just a great way to sort of, be in touch with a younger generation and see what they're interested in and how their brains work and the way that they, consume media and what their hopes and dreams and aspirations are. But yeah, again, just like thinking through like, okay, when I'm, sitting down and trying to come up with an idea, what is it that's actually happening within my head? And, when I'm managing a team and trying to, get a project across the finish line, like what are we doing to, make that process work really efficiently? And, being able to explain that to a group of, 18-year-olds, makes it even easier to explain it to, hopefully easier to explain it to a group of, early 30s professionals.
Right. But, so I want to talk a little bit about, something that you guys mentioned at the top of the podcast here, was just this idea of wearing a lot of hats, many different hats. Right. And again, in the world that we live in, right, sometimes people don't want you to wear that many hats. What do you think the benefit of wearing, the different hats and knowing all the different disciplines? What's the benefit of that for somebody that's coming up, and thinking, wow, should I specialize? That age-old question, should I just be specializing in this, or should I be, doing multiple things, or, kind of in your point of view, what's the benefit of that?
A lot of our process is sort of working backwards. And, so I think being able to look at a problem and, look at the desired deliverables or the desired effects, and looking at the resources that are available, really lets us come up with solutions that are achievable and are efficient. And, we don't really discount those, as creative requirements. I think a lot of, creatives want to ideate in this environment where, there are no real world, repercussions or constraints. And for us, that's just never really felt like a useful exercise. So, because we've actually made all of these things and produced them ourselves or been very hands-on, it gives us a lot of context and sort of, goalposts that we can set for ourselves and make sure that we're, again, doing things, really efficiently and keeping the team on track and pointing things in a direction where we know we can be successful. So I think that's really the, we want to set constraints for ourselves. I think in some ways, like having really, restrictive, box to work in, like that's where the real creativity comes from. We were never in a world where we could go out and just hire the best DP and get the fanciest cameras and get, tons of lights just in case we need to use them. We're always trying to figure out how do we do the most with the least amount of resources possible. And again, I think that's where, real creativity comes from.
Also, Jaime, on your question that while we are doing a crazy breadth of stuff, also it's always also about finding experts to execute different aspects of it. It's not like it's just everyone as a jack of all trades, where there's still, whether it's the very beginning creative ideation and pulling in, creative directors, or it's, as soon as you sit down and have a conversation with a client and they're like, we need to shoot sheet metal. They're like, okay, now we're talking about cars and we need to make sure that we've got people who have that experience, and on the team. And so it's not to say that everyone on the team is a jack of all trades, but on the tail of that, going out and shooting running footage these days, they're like, oh, we also need 30 things for social. So you're like, okay, so maybe that's not just that team that's out that day. Here's other ways that we could flip it, or other things we can bring to the table, or how we can integrate, additional team members who have different skill sets, to be a creative solution, because no longer is that deliverable just that 1 30-second, set of beauty shots. So it's sort of like, you're having to bring a perspective to it, even though there are, specialists in the mix.
Yeah. So would you say, and there's a couple things I want to unpack there, because I love, I'm a big fan of constraints. So I definitely want to come back and talk about that. But, and what you were saying, Zach, it's almost like, I've always thought the big idea is the important part, right? Like what is the big idea? And then it starts to kind of get more towards the craft part of it, right? Because there's big ideas. You can have a big idea, and it sounds like you guys sort of that's your that's your strong suit, right? It's a big idea, and then you bring in people that can help craft it, right? Because it's one thing to have the idea, and then another thing to actually make it. Is that accurate? Is it really about like, thinking big and then figuring out, okay, who are we going to bring in to help us make it?
Yeah, I mean, roughly. I mean, we still have a very integrated model. So, we are not only coming up with that big idea, but we are managing the entire process of production all the way through post-production. And that is our, sort of core area of expertise. I do think that, this latest evolution of our company has gone from like, hey, we should just make something because we instinctively, think it's cool and interesting and know it's something that people will want to watch, to, really starting to incorporate all of those things that can help support, like you're saying, a big idea. So working with strategists and doing research and doing focus groups, so that, we can, support, ideas with evidence and research and, prove to clients like, hey, this is why this, idea should be supported and should be invested in. Right. So yeah, it's definitely evolved. And, I think we've, neither of us are trained as, artists or creatives. So, it's been kind of, learning on the fly and, starting to, unpack, those opportunities that we've had a chance to, bring big creative ideas to the table, and again, make that more of a process that's replicable.
Yeah. And so kind of coming back to this idea of constraints, right? Which I think a lot of people still don't understand or embrace, right? That the idea of the more constraints you have, the stronger the creative is going to be, right? Because it's always been that idea of like, you can do whatever you want, the sky's the limit. And it's like, well, that's actually much harder in a way, even though people think it's easier, but it's much harder. And your ideas are less focused. They're not as strong, right? But how did you guys come to embrace that kind of thinking around constraints?
Yeah, it's just that. I mean, that's, I think, the music video background and the independent film background, and I think just having those experiences early on in our career where it's like, yeah, it's you got a crew of 8 people, and you don't have access to this big fancy camera rig that you really need to actually accomplish a shot that's in your head. So you have to come up with a different way to approach it, or a different way around it, and just loving that part of the process and that problem solving experience. And um, I look back and like some of my favorite music videos are really like the simplest videos that are out there. There's a video by this band, Papas Fritas, from, the late 90s. Mike Mills made the video, and it's, the three singers from the band, they're in Central Park. They've all got like different colored jackets on, and, they just had fun and figured out the as many different ways as possible to come up with these interesting, dynamic, energetic frames, and like they're all really fun, bubbly people, and the song is infectious, and it just like really works.
Yeah.
So if he can do that, like you can come up with a way to approach any problem and still make it fun and interesting, even if you don't have all the resources in the world.
Yeah. And Zach, is how do you kind of, when you guys are talking to, let's say, a new client or an existing client about a new project, how do you kind of help them? Because a lot of times the clients are the ones that can't provide the constraints, right? So how do you guide them to be more like,
Yeah.
we need more, right? Because that could be hard, right? Because
it is hard, and and I think that it's almost back to what Mark said earlier, which is like, you got to put the first piece of the puzzle on the page and kind of encourage an answer to that, so whether, it's like, cool, here's the biggest ideas in the room. It's like, great, but let's go back to some of these cores. What's the messaging? What's the desired outcome? So that, you're kind of having to go back and break it down into pieces. And when you're breaking it down into pieces, you're kind of forcing a conversation around that with the client. And then they can start to see both the process as well as the pitfalls of the wide open, so then you may get to a place where the pieces are now about budget, schedule, or or availability of talent, or sunshine, or whatever they are, and then that helps us continue to funnel the conversation. And as we're kind of like using our knowledge process to put it in front of the client, that's what really is driving that conversation, and I think that whether that's however many times we've done a documentary style shoot where they're like, and when do we cut to the product shot? And we're like, that's a funny thing about those product shots. That wasn't originally part of the conversation about this documentary style shoot,
Right.
Or let's do an experiential activation, and we're going to go up and talk to people. And it's like, okay, have you ever just gone up to talk to somebody with a camera in your hand? Like,
Yeah.
It can be done, but it doesn't always work the way you think it does from behind the camera, so there's sort of a like, let us tell you how we've seen it work. And, and I think that starting to kind of break it down and show those pieces of the process and use those as launch points for conversation is about how that's what that conversation looks like. And the guardrails start to become evident. And then you get into the holy triangle of, good, fast, and cheap, and, or, or whatever that version of that is, that's like, celebrity, no celebrity, reality, no reality, animated, live action, like all of those are options when everything's on the table. But as you start to say, like, what are we trying to accomplish here? It starts to become a little bit more clear, and that's a conversation.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. In terms of, how does strategy factor into all of this? Because in my experience, strategy's always been tough, right? For me, I can probably count on part of one hand the number of strategists that are like, okay, this person really gets it. I think it's super important, but I have found it hard to find really good strategy that just doesn't sound like a bunch of gibberish. So how do you guys feel about strategy? How does it factor into everything that you do?
Yeah, we I think, again, resisted it for a very long time. Mainly because we probably didn't have those experiences of working with really good strategists. And you're like, well, we don't need that. We have plenty of ideas, and we know our ideas are good because we're creative people, and unfortunately that's not the way the business world works. But I think for us it really came into it started clicking when we not only started using strategy, but also that research part of it, and really trying to understand what the audience both wants from products and from their content and experiences, and even being able to be in the same room with members of that audience and work with strategists who can really pull key insights directly from them. And the first time that we did a focus group, my mind was kind of blown, and I walked out of that session being like, well, I've got 10 ideas now that I didn't have before, and not only are they really fun ideas that I would love to make, but they're ideas that I can bring to the client and say, hey, we should do this because our audience is telling us to do it. So it's really become a invaluable part of the process. And, to be honest, a lot of times now, we find ourselves having to try and sell that to clients and be like, hey, no, you should do this because it is effective and it will help generate better work. So yeah, it was, again, really, really eye-opening process that, glad we had a chance to just meet some really awesome strategists and awesome thinkers who, helped get us into that space.
Yeah. You have anything to add about that, Zach?
I think, the other thing that has been a benefit there is that remote work has really opened up the doors to a lot more opportunity, where we could be working with a strategist from Canada or LA or San Francisco or New York or Paris or London on a project, and it doesn't require, a local hire necessarily, because so much of all of what we do these days is distributed that it's kind of, it's opened it up wider to a wider breadth of talent and perspectives, so that's been a benefit.
Yeah. So just, even you describing that, tell us a little bit more about the model, because it sounds like you have sort of a core group of people that are on staff and are the, for lack of a better phrase, sort of the brain trust, and then you're bringing in people to support or to help, or is that the model? And how did you guys, land on that model? And I imagine that kind of factors into this whole idea of being an agency or a creative studio of the future. But tell us about sort of the model and how that works.
Yeah, it's always, again, just been born out of that necessity to stay scrappy and stay nimble, and sort of afford us the opportunity to pursue any type of creative project that we're attracted to or that clients bring to our table. And there's certainly been moments within our career where it's been like, hey, well, are we going to take this opportunity and invest in animation, or invest in AR, and really build out a more substantial pipeline, and we've always came back to the same decision. Well, as soon as we do that, we're kind of pigeonholing ourselves and building a system that then we just need to feed that system with billing, not go after the jobs that we find really satisfying. So it's always been the model, again, like you said, just to keep that core team, which right now is a creative staff of about 4 people, and then surround it with operations and production people who are really good at pulling the rest of those pieces together, maintaining a really consistent process, and just keeping the train on the tracks. So right now we're only about 15 people full time, and those numbers go up to anywhere from 25 to 50 people, depending on what projects we have working on.
Yeah, and I gotta imagine that's also attractive to clients, right? Because I think that especially I think after the pandemic, right? I think some things were probably revealed in sort of the traditional agency client model, right? Where they were like, and I've talked about this on the show before, but it was kind of revealed, so we couldn't shoot anything, right, because of COVID, but we were able to find some old footage we hadn't used, or we were able to find some found content, or we were able to do stuff with animation, and we did it in a fraction of the time for a fraction of the cost. Why are we doing things? Why did things take a year and 6 months, and why do we have 40 people on. I gotta imagine that some of that stuff kind of came to the fore, and studios
Totally.
like yours probably became more attractive because it's like, okay, we're not paying for all this overhead all the time, right? We're paying for a very tight core group that can do things very quickly and nimbly.
Yeah, I think especially when you're on Zoom, it's very easy to count. Like, how many people am I playing for right now? So I think people have become, very acutely aware of, when they're trying to be sold something that they don't actually need. And I think that's just been, having those conversations and say, hey, like we're flexible. Like we have no ulterior motives outside of, just trying to make the best work possible. These are the people who are going to be in charge, and we'll figure out the rest of the pieces later once we know what we're doing.
And it's a pretty different team we're doing 2 projects right now for a client where one of them is 100% 2D animated, like Saturday morning style cartoon. One of them is live action, shooting in different cities around the country. Same campaign, totally different crew, totally different, skill sets from the producing all the way through. Creative direction happening, at the top level on the agency side, but that ability to offer those, that breadth of creative storytelling and possibilities is about being nimble and being able to pull from our creative community and kind of build the right team for the right project.
That's very cool. Yeah, I love that. So where do you, what's next for Ghost Robot, and like where do you guys, what do you want to be doing more of, or what do you see for the next 5 years, or what's the big dream? What's getting you up in the mornings?
It's a great question. I think we've started to move back a little bit towards our roots in film. Zach's working on a feature documentary right now. And I think more and more we've been finding opportunities where, those two sort of worlds, overlap, and, creating content that is more serialized or long form for clients. Just recently did a podcast for, an advertising client. So I think, continuing to push those two things ahead and, just finding, as many different ways to just, explore storytelling as we can, doing a little bit more, branding and brand strategy. Zach's making a card game. So, there's, just finding those opportunities to be creative and, know that we've got the skill set and the infrastructure to back it up.
That's cool. What's this card game you're working on? Can you share anything, or is it top secret?
It's not top secret. There's we had an awesome Kickstarter earlier in the year. It's a card game that I built that designed and created with my daughter. And it sort of goes back to that, like, we're constant, we encourage everybody on the team to really, embrace what their own creative, like, drive and push. You never know when that's going to become a tool in the tool set, like we made a graphic novel. We used to have a gallery space in our old studio and would do a zine. And one time sitting with a client, we're like, hey, we do this zine. We could do it for this brand activation. And they're like, that's amazing. So you never know when it's going to overlap. But the card game's a pretty fun sci-fi adventure games coming out in December, January, called Space Hoppers. It's pretty fun, but it was it was an awesome insight into just another avenue of storytelling, production, management, and everything else. So yeah.
What a fun
encourage creative exploration around the world.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, what a fun and creative entity you guys have built. Congratulations on that, because I think it's rare. I mean, I talk to a lot of folks and they're doing a lot of great work, but to be at a place where you can really sort of let your creative mind just go to a lot of different places and know that you can make it happen, right? I mean, that's got to be a lot of fun. So congratulations to you guys on that. I wish you continued success, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do next. And thanks for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. I think people are going to take a lot from the episode. So thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. It was really fun chatting.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. It was great to be here, and love listening to your conversations with other creative directors. It's always eye opening. So keep up the good work, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that, and thanks to you guys too for what you're doing. I think we share that mission, right, of sort of helping the next generation, come up in a way that that's helping them become better at the role of creative directors and creatives and the account side even, right? So thank you guys for being part of that, and let's keep in touch. I'll talk to you guys soon.
You got
awesome.
It.
All right, take care.
You.
All right, bye. And that's going to do it for another episode of Confessions of a Creative Director. Thanks to my very special guests, Mark DePace and Zach Mortensen of Ghost Robot. What a cool operation they got going on there. Man, it must be fun to be able to solve all those marketing challenges with cool solutions like video games and t-shirts and comic books and all kinds of stuff. So congrats to you guys on all your success. Hey, Barbie people, I'd like you to invite you to become a supporter of this fine program. You can do it in a couple of different ways. Check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/confessions of a creative director. You can sign up there and you'll receive some goodies along the way. Summaries of the show. I'm thinking of all kinds of other things. Maybe I'll clue you in on some of my drink recipes. We're going to have a lot of fun building it together, so I invite you to become a paid supporter there. You can pick up a copy of my book, What's the Big Idea? An Indispensable Guide to Becoming a Kick-Ass Creative Director. You can sign up for coaching as we come towards the end of the year. Now is the perfect time to get it set up for next year. If you're going to be maybe asking your boss for a promotion, now is the time to sign up for some coaching with yours truly. JaimeCabreraCreative.com and learn all about that. All right, folks, until next time, peace, love, and creativity. See ya.
I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but could you make the logo bigger? Bigger, bigger, make it bigger. Make the logo